702.
702.
Stephen is on The Money Show.
6 to 8 p.m.
Well, last night on The Money Show, you heard a conversation with Warren Tucker, he's the motoring expert, and we were talking about why WeBuyCars is no longer using the independent car assessment service Dekra. Instead, people who want to buy their cars are using, or being asked or told to use, Inspectify. It's a new car assessment service, but Inspectify is owned by WeBuyCars. In other words, WeBuyCars is telling you if you want to buy its cars, you must trust a service that it owns. Wynand Beukes is the Deputy CEO at WeBuyCars. Wynand, good evening. I'm very glad we're able to have this conversation. Thank you. Firstly, why have you stopped using Dekra? Why did you decide to no longer use a service that is independent and is owned by someone else?
Evening, Stephen. Great chatting to you. I think it's important that we just clarify. I think we've been using the word Dekra as an encompassing word for many services. If you look at Dekra and Dekra's website, they provide more than one service. Firstly, if you look at a legal rotary certificate that you can obtain at any Dekra branch nationwide, and these legal rotary certificates is necessary or required by South African law before a vehicle can be licensed. And this is governed by the Department of Transport in South Africa. Secondly, another service they provide is the vehicle condition report. It's important to note that a condition report is not required by law by any dealership to provide to sell a vehicle. It's an additional service or value-added service that we provide to help our consumers understand the condition of the used vehicle before making a purchasing decision. So what we've done is we've yes and no to answer your question. Yes, we've parted ways on the condition report of Dekra, and we still have a great relationship with Dekra, and we use them still for the required legal rotary certificate that we cannot provide. We're not governed to do that. So we only took ownership of the condition report, and that's what we built last year, and that's the brand that's called Inspectify.
Okay, but why?
So, Stephen, I think it's important. It's very the Dekra report or condition report was a very technical report. And if you go back and we visited the US last year, and you look at international players, that's the trend like CarMax in the US. They all provide a internal service called a vehicle assessment or a 125-point report, and there's many dealerships in South Africa that's doing that. And we felt that the technical report or the condition report I provided was very technical, and we want to be provide information or clarity to the information to the consumer and to understandable report. So we took over the technical development of the condition report or the assessment itself, and we generate report ourselves in such a way that it's palatable for a average consumer to understand the report. Especially for first-time buyers, it's a big financial decision to make, and you need to understand the condition of the vehicle when you get into it. It's still a second-hand vehicle, and we, from a trust and transparency perspective, we are just there to serve the consumer and to make sure that they understand what they're buying before they make that purchasing decision.
Okay, so I'm glad you used the word trust, because that is everything in this. And essentially what you're doing as WeBuyCars is you're saying, Stephen, here's a car. Here's the condition of the car. The condition of the car is what Inspectify, which we own, say it is. And Stephen might well feel, well, actually, I would rather know that the condition of the car is what a third party says it is, not you and not me.
No, Stephen, I think I'll come back to my first point. It is not required by law to provide a condition report. It's a value-added service provided by WeBuyCars.
Sure.
And by some of the bigger groups in South Africa. The smaller dealerships in South Africa doesn't provide any conditional report on vehicles being sold. So this value-added service is just a way for us to communicate the condition of the vehicle. Yes, you can argue that we're marking our own homework, but it's all in the quality of the report. I think the trust from the public will tell in time, as we can portray the condition of the vehicle in such a method that the consumer trusts that report and he knows what the condition of that vehicle is. I think that's what it's all about. It's about the trust and the accuracy of the report, and we need to make sure that it's accurate as possible.
Who's running Inspectify? Who's in charge of it?
So Inspectify is a wholly owned subsidiary of WeBuyCars. So it's 100% fully owned subsidiary from WeBuyCars, and we've developed the software internally in WeBuyCars.
Okay, so how can I know it's independent is really the question.
So, Stephen, it's not a case of independence. It's a case of the quality of the report. Like we mentioned, I think it's not required by law. So if we provide a high quality report that's got accurate information and the consumer can trust that information, the independence is not going to be. We can have a governing body that governs, or independent auditor that audits this, but if the quality report is not up to standard and the consumer can't trust it, it's not going to work in any case. So for us, independence is not about the independence. It's about the quality and the trustworthiness of that report, and we're working very hard to improve that report, and making sure that the consumer knows exactly what the condition of the vehicle is when he purchases that vehicle. So if any roadworthy relevant conditions that he needs to fix, or we can fix for him, and we can take it to a Dekra station, for example, to get a roadworthy test or certificate.
Okay, but I understand the value in having a report that is easier to understand. I have to say to you, I would find a report that is conducted independently of more value, because I can always take the Dekra report, or I can always take the more technical report and spend some time understanding it, or going to ask a friend or asking someone else or whatever. The question really is, and it keeps boiling down to trust. And I hate to be so direct, but how can we trust you, Wynand?
Well, time will tell, Stephen. The quality of the report, again, it will come back to the consumer. If we accurately portray the information and the condition of the vehicle, that's where the test is going to lie. It's not in the independent auditing. It's in the quality of report, and we're going to stand by that point. We feel that if we can accurately portray that information, the consumer will trust it. If we make haste of it and we are not true and trustworthy on that report, it will come up very, very quickly.
Okay, so on that point, I presume Inspectify has been running for a while, and someone, somehow, maybe you've done this already, would be able to say to Inspectify, give us the data on what percentage of cars there were with defects. And do you know, at this stage, Wynand, if there is a difference between the percentage of cars with defects found by Dekra and the percentage of cars with defects found by Inspectify?
So, Stephen, no, we haven't checked that yet. So, in regards to Inspectify, it's currently internally used by WeBuyCars only. This is not a service provided to the market or a consumer outside of WeBuyCars. So, we just provide this for internal use only at this stage. And we Inspectify, we process all our cars through Inspectify when we purchase it before we sell it, to provide it to report to the consumer. So from that data perspective, and the importance here is to notify what a problem is. We are by law required, or not law required, we are required to state what is a roadworthy relevant condition and what do you have to fix on that vehicle to make sure it will pass a roadworthy test. And that is required by law to make sure that we have safe roads for the consumer to drive on.
All right, Wynand, thank you very much indeed. I do appreciate the time. Wynand Beukes is the Deputy CEO of WeBuyCars. Well, I'd appreciate your view on that. 072-702-1702. How do you feel? Do you feel that you can trust them? I mean, would you buy a car from me because I say that I've looked at it and it's fine? Would you prefer someone else to look at it if you're buying it from me? Or do you think actually we're making a big fuss about nothing? 011-883-0702, 021-446-0567, or voice notes, please, on 072-702-1702. One or two WhatsApp messages already coming through about it.
The Money Show
with Stephen Grootes.
Some interesting numbers and an almost contradictory picture of our economy emerging in the ABSA Purchasing Managers Index today. The headline figure shows that PMI contracted to just 40.5 points in December. Technically, anything below 50 is a contraction, so that would mean that the manufacturing activity shrank quite dramatically. But there's another index as part of this, which tracks expected business conditions in 6 months' time, and that jumped by 18 points. In other words, you've got a sector that's contracting and everyone's very optimistic. Selo Sokele is an economist at ABSA CIB and therefore can understand nuance much better than I can. Selo, good evening. Why is everyone in a contracting sector so optimistic?
Evening to you and your listeners, Stephen. What we've realized is that at the end of every year and at the beginning of every year, we tend to see people quite optimistic about activity and about 6 months' time. So people tend to be quite hopeful at the end and beginning of the year. So it's nothing new.
Oh, really? So that means then that the headline figure that shows such a big contraction is actually the number that we really do need to look at. And it was a big contraction.
Yeah, correct. So, look, if you look at the level at which the PMI fell, I mean, it's levels that we last saw in 2020, just after those harsh lockdowns. And when you look at how it fell, it was quite broad-based, but it was mainly led by inventory and employment. And what's quite worrying here is that new sales orders, which track demand, remain subdued and mainly due to domestic factors. So it's not a good print to end the year.
The employment index was down too. So I presume then that along with this contraction, manufacturing is shedding jobs.
Yeah, so it's tough, Stephen, to add jobs when business conditions have been quite difficult for some time in the manufacturing sector. I mean, I was looking at the quarterly employment statistics for Q3 just before we went for Christmas holidays. I mean, employment is down by quite a lot on a year-on-year basis. And it doesn't look like manufacturers are going to add employment numbers significantly anytime soon, at least until we see business conditions start to improve. But what I want to say here is that it's not uncommon for the PMI and actual output data to not move in the same direction. So when you look at output data in the manufacturing sector at the beginning of the quarter, the data was quite good, but the number that came out today was quite disappointing. That said, even when you look at the quarter as a whole, it seems like output in the manufacturing sector actually continued to increase in Q4.
It's interesting that, I mean, it would seem then that would also underpin perhaps some of the optimism. People are producing a little bit more. And I was interested that there seems to be a shortage of specialized skills.
Yeah, so skills is a problem not just in the manufacturing sector. I mean, if you look at the critical skills list that the government, tends to publish, they also collaborate a lot with manufacturers. So that's why you have things like visa reforms under Operation Wynand to exactly address these sort of issues. So yes, you're right. The employment issue is not just a weak activity story, but it's also a skills shortage story.
Selo, thanks so much. Selo Sekele is an economist at ABSA CIB. 25 minutes after 6.
The Money Show.
The markets.
Norman McKechnie is an independent investor. Norman, good evening. Good to chat again. There are quite a few things going on in the metals markets, and I'm particularly fascinated by silver. I haven't spent much time in my life talking about silver, but certainly it's moving.
Yeah, it is. I think just to summarize probably what's happened there, the price has moved up very sharply. Certainly if you look at the gold-silver ratio, silver in the short term has really sharply outperformed gold. Gold obviously has done well over the year. And I think what we've got there, what we're seeing is that silver is used as a reserve asset by banks. Basel III has allowed that to happen. And I think there's been a lot of people that have written paper on the back of the silver holdings. And what we've had is there's probably more paper out there than there is physical gold. And you can actually ask for physical delivery. And there's a shortage of inventory. And what's happened is people have had to go and borrow silver. So the lease rates to borrow silver have moved up. And then the Chinese have also said they're not selling silver into the market. And that's pushed the price up. So it's probably a short-term factor. But yeah, interesting nonetheless. And we've seen a similar sort of story in copper as well.
It's interesting how in so many metals all at the same time, things are moving in ways that you wouldn't have expected just a year ago.
No, exactly. I think, if you look at copper, the issue there has been the tariffs that were proposed in July. That saw inventory moving to the States, which has stayed there just probably on the back of data center and power station builds, which are required for AI. That's probably a longer-term factor, so they probably got too much copper there. And then we had the Grasberg fertility in September and the closure in December, and that's what saw the copper price move up fairly sharply. So there's a lack of supply again. So that's pushed things up. I mean, the counter there is oil, but don't know whether you want to go into that, Stephen.
We talked about oil a lot because of what happened over the weekend. Just on the copper story, I mean, how long does it stay at these prices? Some people are predicting, and certainly the Anglo-Teck merger is all around that. Essentially, the idea saying that, look, they're going to, that's going to be the long-running metal for a longer term. Do you buy that? I mean, do you see copper prices rising through the year?
I think if one looks at it short term, obviously with these supply issues, maybe there is, still a bit of upside, but it's not sustainable at these levels. I think, the whole issue has been, if you look at what the AI, potential spend is, there's a lot of data centers, there's a lot of power stations that are required just to keep and sustain these AI build-outs. The issue that you've got is it's probably longer term, so they've probably got too much inventory, so that probably gets liquidated and comes back into the market. Nevertheless, in the longer term, there's a positive underlying demand. We can argue the toss about where AI goes and what the demand is and what the sort of financing of that is, and are they making money at this point in time. But I think longer term, the fact is that there is a shortage of copper supply, and the demand will pick up over time, that you're likely to see prices being reasonably positive. However, I don't think they stay at these levels that we're seeing at the moment.
And platinum, particularly, Norman, I mean, a strong start to the year, as you would sort of expect, based on what was happening towards the end of last year. How far does it go?
Yeah, I think, again, it's difficult to actually get all the numbers, but essentially we've got a deficit. There's been with platinum prices, if you go back a year or so, we're probably, almost half of what they are now, as was palladium. And so there was no incentive to invest, and I think there hasn't been any new investment in new mines, bar probably Northern, that has put mines in, and that was a good number of years ago. So if one looks at it as the grades decline, as the supply out of those mines decline, there is a deficit, and I think that's what's pushed the price up in the short term. And then I think the move from the electric vehicles back to internal combustion engines, with the subsidies going, and then people also, politicians allowing the VWs and other manufacturers to produce, not having to produce as many electrical vehicles in terms of what was required by 2030, that they've probably built in inventory, and they realize that there is a deficit, so you don't be caught out, rather pay up for something that is a part of the total costs for the vehicle, but not a major cost. And that's what's happened. It'd be interesting to see just how sustainable that is, but I think having a deficit there probably just underpins where the price actually falls back to.
Norman McKechnie, thanks so much, independent investor. Really do appreciate the time. Bringing the time on the Money Show to 6:30.
The Money Show on 702.
Monday to Friday, 6 to 8 p.m.
17 minutes now to 7 the time. Well, you'll have heard so much conversation around metal prices recently. You heard Norman McKechnie a few moments ago. He was talking particularly about gold. We've been speaking about gold. He was talking particularly about copper. We've been talking about gold as well. And there's signs now that the prices of both metals are going to continue going up for quite some time. That will have an impact on how the mining sector reacts, on how they spend their capital. Craig Brewer is the Managing Director, Co-Head for Origination and Investment Banking at Absa CIB. Craig, good evening. So we know why gold is doing so well. It's partly about central banks selling their dollars and buying gold. But what is driving this sudden rally in copper prices?
Thank you, Stephen. Thanks for this opportunity. I think if there are two metals out there, gold and copper have the clearest forward horizon in terms of demand and expectations. Obviously, gold, as you've mentioned, geopolitical risk is underlying that, and that will continue for almost years to come. In terms of copper, it is very much global GDP driven, and at the same time, it is the catalyst with regards to energy transformation from EVs all the way through. At the same time, you've got this massive capex in terms of these data centers, both for storage and more particularly for AI, and they require a significant amount of copper. So if you look at it with the copper from Latin America, all the Africa in terms of Zambia and the DRC, there is a deficit in terms of copper output as to what versus copper need. And, China is still chugging along. You've seen in the States, their GDP is continuing and there's been focus on defense today, etc. And all of those electronic drones, equipment and the like require copper. So as you've seen, whilst EV vehicles have kind of tapered off somewhat, eventually by 2035, etc., virtually everything will be EV. So there's this massive underlying pull for copper across a broad range of industries. And that's why I think you've seen copper break through to a new high of, I think, $13,000 a ton in the last couple of days.
So unless someone invents something that can do what copper does, or there's a massive AI smash, I mean, you can suddenly see why Anglo and Tech are doing what they're doing.
Correct, and that's for the Anglo Tech. That is clearly it was a copper play as much as BHP looked at Anglo 18 months ago. And as you said, whilst other metals from aluminium all the way through do have the same ability to transfer electrons, copper is still the most efficient in terms of both transfer and effectively in cost and the amount you need. There are various other metals, but then you need a lot more, which means that then you can't put in terms of your Tesla, you can't streamline it and get just these very narrow ribbons in terms of the electrical harnesses. You've got to look at something bigger with more weight. So it is unlikely, and I'm not a chemical engineer,
Sure.
that there's going to be anything to replace copper over the longer term.
Yeah, neither am I, but the logic sounds good. I've been fascinated by the deals we see in the gold sector. So as you say, gold's on a sustained rally. Mines don't seem to be, you would think one of the responses to that would be to basically prospect more. Now, I understand, it's such a long lead time. You're probably looking at 10 years in many countries. Very few places you could do it in less than that. Find gold, know that it's worth mining and get gold out of it. But it's still interesting to see so many deals in which mines are buying other miners.
Absolutely. And remember, when you buy either miners in terms of a group or the actual assets, even at a project stage, often all the feasibility studies have been done, there are drilling programs, there's early capex, so your risk is much lower. Whereas if you're doing total greenfields, you've actually got to go out and you've got a long period of 5 to 8 years in terms of that exploration building up to your early works. So it's far quicker and easier to go and acquire other assets or gold companies. The challenge you've got at the moment is at this gold price of 4,450, it makes it challenging in terms of acquisition prices. That's why you've seen a couple of these gold consolidations or mergers, they're done on a share basis. So no cash transfers, or there's a smaller amount of cash, because that makes it easy for shareholders to accept that they're going to be ups and downs. The worst thing a shareholder wants is that all mining companies, but in particular gold, you go out on an acquisition spree at effectively the top of the gold market. And then gold declines a bit, maybe because of global stability, etc., which is unlikely. You then have a period where your acquisition is earnings destructible, dilutive. And that's what shareholders don't want. And they've seen this in various cycles when mining houses have gone out on these acquisition sprees only to regret it a couple of years down the line.
So you would think with prices like this, particularly for copper and gold, Africa would be at the center of it. We have reserves of both. But if there's no actual prospecting, then that's not going to happen.
Remember that if you talk of that in terms of isolation, if you look at the West Africa, Ghana, that corridor, there is still some exploration. In South Africa, there's much less. But remember, we have mined out a significant portion of our reserves and resources. But having said that, you've just seen West Wits, an Australian ASX-listed company with a mine. They've just raised the project finance and equity for just on the other side of Soweto. You're starting to see that again. But yes, in terms of raw exploration, that is extremely costly. And remember, when you go into some of the jurisdictions in, say, Africa, and Mali as an example, you have changing regimes, changing royalties, changing taxes, etc. The risk factor is large, and hence I think you see more of the consolidation and the M&A coming through than greenfields exploration.
Craig Brewer, thanks so much. Really enjoyed that. Managing Director, Co-Head for Origination and Investment Banking at ABSA CIB. 10 minutes to 7.
The Money Show with Stephen Grootes is brought to you by ABSA CIB, a Pan-African bank invested in your story and the potential it can unlock because your story matters. ABSA is a registered FSP.
8 minutes now to 7. Well, Business Day reporting this morning, the DTIC Minister Parks Tau confirming ICASA, the communications regulator, is looking at new regulations that would force cell phone networks to roll over your data every month. In other words, if you bought data for January, you bought at the beginning of January, you bought a gigabyte and you only used half of that, instead of you losing it at the end of the month, as we've done for years and years and years, you would actually keep it. And you know, of course, there's been a concerted campaign to drive data costs down. Koketso Moeti is the executive director at Amandla.mobi. They've played a big role in that campaign. Koketso, good evening. I think all of us have groaned, moaned, complained about the lack of data rollover at some stage. Is government now serious about making some kind of change? Koketso, can you hear me? Oh dear. I'm going to put Koketso back to our producer and just see if we can sort that line out. I'm very aware of the irony of the fact that we're talking about communication and the guest on communication about cell phone networks is suddenly unable to hear us. These things do happen, as you know. And let's just see if we are able to get Koketso back on your radio and to hear from her in just a moment. I do think it's an important conversation that we will be having. Don't forget as well, of course, in a little while, we'll be looking at some other issues on The Money Show, and particularly the idea of humanoid robots. I don't quite understand why there's such a big fuss about them. I mean, if you don't like humans, fine, but I think most of us do like humans, but I don't get the point of trying to replace humans. That doesn't make any sense to me. So I sort of don't really understand. If you want a functional robot to do things for you, well, then why don't you just go ahead and do that? And it would probably involve wheels. All right, Koketso Moeti back with us now, the Executive Director at Amandla.mobi. Koketso, good evening. I mean, do you think government is serious now about making some kind of change to ensure that our data can roll over at the end of the month?
Yes, there is an absolute seriousness. ICASA had started the process a while ago to change parts of the regulation to enable this. The thing that we should be absolutely cautious about, though, in how this is implemented, is that it shouldn't only benefit high-income consumers, but low-income consumers as well, who tend to buy smaller bundles, right, and are much more impacted by the inability to roll over those bundles.
I mean, in a way, we should preference smaller bundles rather than bigger ones.
Absolutely, absolutely. So what tends to happen is low-income consumers buy an hour of data or an hour a day and so on. So in some instances, as we know, when load reduction happens, we know load shedding has been reduced, but load reduction is still happening in many, many townships of South Africa. What would then happen is you spent some of your last money. I mean, people are talking about how they choose between buying a loaf of bread and buying data, right? And then there's no electricity and no network. So by the time the electricity comes back, you've already lost the data that you would have had. And so we should be fighting to ensure that the benefit of this change particularly benefits these low-income consumers.
So, Koketso, I mean, you'll know this better than I do, but the cell phone companies have a particular model that's based around time. So I went into my cell phone provider and I saw that I could buy 2 gigabytes that would be valid for 3 days for 34 Rand. Now, 2 gigabytes for 34 Rands, actually not a bad deal. And I could probably, I could stream enough music for a kind of 2-day party if I wanted to do that on that amount. Isn't the risk that companies change their model and make that 2 gigabytes much more expensive because there will be no time limit, and the longer term consequences, in fact, that data becomes more expensive?
That is indeed one of the risks, and this is why it should be carefully done, right? I know a lot of people do not want data to expire at all, that data should just be, just run and run and run. But the other risk that it poses, apart from what you've just mentioned, is that the smaller vendor is no incentive to keep the small, innovative bundles that they've introduced that low-income consumers can afford to disappear. Because if there is no expiry, then why would it be that you have these differentiated bundle types that meet people at their different financial resources, right? And so when we talk about data and data expiry and rollover, it's not that we understand it is not a perishable good, right? But what we are saying is that it should roll over for the same validity period. So if it was 2 days that you had, let it roll over for 2 days for a certain amount of time, not indefinitely. Because what we cannot risk is impacting those smaller bundles, whether cost-wise or their very existence, because that would in fact make things harder for low-income consumers and increase the digital divide in South Africa.
So as a principle, you do accept the idea of a time limit on how long you can use the bundle for that particular reason?
Absolutely, absolutely. And there are ways to do it that ensure that don't prejudice consumers, right? So, yeah, you could do it for, if you bought a month's bundle, right?
Sure.
It rolls over for another month.
Sure.
But you put a limit on how many months it can run over. But the moment it becomes indefinite, low-income consumers risk being harmed by it.
Sure. Data costs have come down really quite significantly in the last, call it 5 years, maybe a bit longer than that. How do you think now we compare with other countries? And I realize that nowadays, if someone wants to watch a movie, they're probably going to wait or watch their series or whatever it is, wait for the time they walk past a known Wi-Fi area because there's so many more of them, download it there and then watch it later. I mean, there are more options than there used to be, partly because there is so much more fiber around. How do our data costs compare now? And I'm talking mobile data.
So hard to draw a comparison, right? And the drop was significant, but it was just a starting point. What we should be really concerned about is the moves that mobile network operators are making to monopolize the fiber space at the moment, right? We've seen like requests for mergers or interest in merging with certain companies. And part of the reason we are seeing that right now is because as more people offload, to your point, fiber becomes more accessible, it is cheaper, and so we are seeing people offload their use to fiber, right? And so the next space for profiteering for these mobile network operators is in fiber. And especially since 2020, we've seen fiber become much more accessible in townships, and that is only expanding everywhere we look. And so we have to keep an eye on that. Otherwise, we risk what they did in the mobile network space, they will repeat it in fiber too.
Very interesting point. Koketso, thanks so much. Koketso Moeti, Executive Director at amandla.mobi. In a moment, why is everyone obsessed with humanoid robots? Aren't there enough of us on two legs? Are you with The Money Show at 7 o'clock?
The Money Show, Tech Thursdays.
Well, the Consumer Electronics Show underway in Las Vegas in the US, and lots of conversations around AI, but also around humanoid robots. Siphumelele Zondi is our tech expert. Siphumelele, hi. Good to talk to you again. Happy New Year and all of that. Why is everyone so obsessed by humanoid robots? I don't get what they can do that nothing else can do for me.
Hello, Stephen, and Happy New Year. Well, it seems like this is the tech industry's, I suppose, decision of what's next in the tech space because, for example, when every year starts, we look at what's going to be happening in that particular year. And sometimes you think back about 2 to 3 years when the advancement in AI became what it is, and it was a shock to everybody. And so this year, we're being told that, and actually the first event of the year is the Consumer Electronics Show that's taking place in Las Vegas in the United States of America. It's the first big tech show of the year. And everybody's talking about humanoid robots, and the tech sector saying, well, this is the new big advancement in technology, and they should be helping us in whichever manner and way, and we should wait for that time. So it's I suppose it can be called the tech sector's a way of saying, well, that there is some sort of advancement that's taking place in what artificial intelligence is going to be and what it's going to be for us even in the home.
I mean, I grew up reading, I don't know if you've read them, the Isaac Asimov stories, science fiction. They're about robots. They come with laws so they can't harm humans and all of that. And all of that is predicated. It's based on a robot that actually looks like a human. It has a face, all of those things. I mean, I don't think we're ever going to have a robot like that. I think the human face is just simply too unique. So I still keep coming back to it. What kind of things are we talking about? Are we talking about something that makes you a drink or something different?
Well, at the moment, it seems like there are robots that are starting to fold your clothes for you, make a meal for you, but it's still painfully slow in how they do it. And also they are being pitched as machines that will work in factories, like putting together, there's a car brand that is saying that in about 2018 it's going to be putting together some car parts in a factory out in Asia. And so they are said to be helpers in the home as also as workers in factory. But right now, from what we're seeing and what's been shown to us, it still does it very painfully slow.
Well, look, a robot will fold anything better than me, so it's fine. And it'll wrap presents better than I will too. What else are we seeing at the Consumer Electronics Show? I mean, it's a big showcase for the industry.
Just about all sorts, really. There is advancement, for example, in medicine that we're seeing, and how these machines are going to perhaps help us breathe better if we have certain breathing conditions. But it seems to be all at, or a huge amount of it seems to be at testing phase at the moment. It doesn't seem like there's much that's new that's going out to the market, because you're also getting a lot of wearable technology that's also being showcased. We've been talking about what wearable glasses, for example, can do for us in future. That's still there. That's still being showcased. And also the conversion of what you might have, whether it's your spectacles or whether it's your shades that you wear, converting it into some smart technology as well that can do a lot of these big brands can do. But we do know that wearable technology hasn't really taken off as much as it's been pitched in the past. And also there's a lot of new car tech as well, and these driverless vehicles that now also have technology that enable or assist you to do some work as you are heading to the office. I'm not sure how safe that is, because it's now a multifunction tool. That's what they're telling us. So it's driving, but at the same time, it's a computer that's also helping you with certain other tasks that you wouldn't have done.
When else are you going to listen to the radio? We've also, I mean, Grok, so many people are worried about AI being used for different things, and Grok AI seems to have been used to create child porn images. And I mean, this is an engine that's based on Twitter, X.
And also, yes, that's actually something that lawmakers in Europe are worried about. But also, if you think about the platform itself, X itself, as Twitter, it did not allow any adult content to be uploaded there. But when it became X, suddenly rules and regulations changed. And suddenly there was a lot of nudity, there was a lot of pornography that started to appear there. So now, again, when you think about Grok, it's another a platform that's owned by Elon Musk, who also owns X. And lawmakers in Europe are worried that there are people who managed to create some child pornography, AI child pornography. So now these are not humans, these are not real children, but they are kids in, I suppose, in an imagined manner,
sure.
Where someone went online and decided to create these images, and this platform allowed it.
I mean, I don't know how you stop AI from doing that. And that, for me, is one of the scary things. I mean, it's incredibly dangerous.
But it's the platforms themselves now. Because it ventures into ethics of it all. Because when you, for example, look at the many laws that many countries could have that look into this, they'd be looking at protection of children who are humans. Or they would look at protection of humans in general, really, and the person whose visuals might have been shared on social media, but in this case, it's not a human, which then means, or it's not an existing human being. It's someone went and drew an image, so which means now that new laws need to be drawn up, and this needs to be done pretty quickly because. When you think about it, when you look at it, when a child looks at it, and also what it does to the minds of children, which might see images that look like them and see that as normal behavior because they can't differentiate.
It's incredibly scary. I mean, normally, as you say, laws look at protecting humans. You're sort of protecting society in this case and not individual humans. I do get a sense, Sipho Malele, everyone talks about AI all the time, and I've seen so many sort of bits of commentary across my email saying, this is the year of AI, this is the year it changes your workplace. There is still a part of me that goes, yeah, but only a bit.
Yes. Because you still need a human hand. Like you mentioned earlier about, for example, the human face as they're creating these humanoid robots, and what's unique about the human face. And AI still can't really be replicated to mimic a human to that extent. So even with the tasks that AI does, a human still needs to give an instruction to say, do this, which means you still need a human to do the work and to give the instruction to AI to do a certain thing faster. Let's say like doing research, because a human needs to say, research this for me, and then it does the research, it then brings it back up. And as we've discussed in the past, sometimes it's not as great as the work that a human would have done, at least for now.
No, sure. Sipho Malele, thank you. Sipho Malele Zondi, do appreciate it. Our tech expert on The Money Show, 18 minutes after 7.
The Money Show, Small Business Focus.
Small Business Focus is brought to you by Capitec. Start up or scale up with Capitec, the business bank for everyone. Well, normally when you speak to the owner of a small company and they say they're going to export to other markets, I think many might often think, well, look, they're going to Europe or the US. But now there's a strong argument that, in fact, we should be looking more into Africa. Loncedo Mtwentwe is the Managing Director, Advantage Advisory, and host of the Psycho Biz Impact podcast. Loncedo, good evening. You suggest smaller firms should really be looking into Africa. We know the market is huge. How difficult is it to get your goods into those markets and to get access to the market?
Good evening, Stephen. Great to talk to you, and I compliment the senior and to everyone. Stephen. Yeah, look. Number one, I think what we need to if you bring the context together, is that if you look at the intra-African trade, it is around just below 20%. So therefore, what that means the countries within Africa trading amongst each other. Is that rate is quite low compared to other continents in terms of how they're trading amongst each other. You're looking at about 60 to 70%. So therefore, at the heart of the successful G20 summit that was held last year, you would have seen or you would have had quite a lot with some of the task forces around to say, how do we really promote the African growth and development, and therefore the SMEs as well to collaborate with big corporates. They were very, very good points that were shared around that. And it is an opportunity that the South African SMEs have to take the advantage of that, have to really say, look, how do we scale further? We know that in terms of the geopolitical risks that are actually happening in other continents, therefore, most of the South African SMEs, therefore, have to really start to look at how do you partner with some of the local players or either some of the African players to penetrate actually in those particular countries. So therefore, that's why it's very important that it's not only just you look at Africa as either so much international partners, however, you look at just as a regional integration where you're moving your goods from just another region to another region. The moment we start to look at Africa in that particular way, and the moment we put the narrative that Africa is also a developing country, and we, as Africans, we have to bet on it. Therefore, we have a very good chance that we will continue to grow this economy.
So a large part of this, obviously, is around the sort of the African Continental Free Trade Agreement. It's supposed to make things easier. Does it actually do that?
And Stephen, that's the most important part. And I always say to people, the African Continental Free Trade Area, what it does, it aims to create this single market of goods and services across Africa. And we are talking about a market of about 1.4 billion population, right? And it tries to really reduce some of these trade barriers and foster this economic integration amongst each other. And that is one of the biggest issues or the challenges that most African businesses or South African businesses have had to share, to say, look, for us to move our goods from South Africa to Kenya or to DRC, the issues are around the infrastructure, the issues are around border management, and that's what the CFTA is actually trying to resolve. And we have started to see some very good track record, some kickoff, especially in 2023 and 2024, really coming in 2025 as well. Some of the trade between some of these countries, about 47 or 48 countries have signed some of the agreements in terms of let these countries start to trade, let some of the tariff be removed on some of the particular goods. And therefore, the moment some of the SMEs start to understand what the CFTA tries to do and how you capitalize, if you're a manufacturer, for instance, to move some of your goods from South Africa to another country, you realize that you are early to capture some of these markets before someone else from other continents come and capture these markets.
Is it best to do it through e-commerce? I mean, is digital the way?
No, absolutely. There's a report that was shared, Stephen, by Mistra, and that was connected as well with Take a Lot. That said, look, there's a huge opportunity when it comes to online retail market that is really anticipated or expected to be above 1 trillion. But for that to be unlocked, you need a very good public and private partnerships for them to really unlock this. And therefore, anyone who plays within e-commerce, anyone who plays within, health tech or agro-tech, those are the people that will capitalize. Because at an infrastructure level, it becomes difficult to move some of these goods. But if you have access to, for instance, with e-commerce, what it does, it gives you market access, not only in South Africa, but to different markets. And therefore, any other SMEs that is within that is playing within the digital economy stands a very good chance to capture this market.
So, I mean, if you said to me, Stephen, go to Lagos, I kind of wouldn't know where to start if I was going to sell, I don't know, steering wheels or something.
Yeah.
I would need to go and find, I don't know, probably my friend's neighbor's previous dog owner's friend and tap them on the shoulder. I mean, it's important to work with local people, right?
Yes. Stephen, we know some of our South African, big corporates that have tried to expand to Africa. We have to be realistic that to access and operate in Africa is not that easy, all right? However, when you look and you study what are some of the reasons some of these big businesses have failed in these particular countries, at the heart of that, one has always been the relationship or the collaboration with the local players and the investment that you have to make to get the right partners that understand the lay of the land, that understand the value chain of that particular country. And that's one of those things that if an SME, you're about to move to another country, we're about to move your goods, make sure that you do your proper due diligence, make sure that you identify good partners that you're going to partner with. There are some big businesses that we have, the likes of MultiChoice. They've done extremely well in Africa, but at the heart of that has always been the fact that they've managed to partner with some good key players. So also what is important, it's not just about just moving to any other country, but identify some of the countries that have high growth markets and don't just move in easy, but pilot for like a year or two before we are fully concentrated in those particular countries. And the more you do that, that's when you start to understand Africa and the importance around the local partnerships that we have to forge with some of the local agents in those particular countries. But it is not an easy market. it needs a very good due diligence. It needs you to have a very good risk strategy, and you implement that and you monitor that properly. So, yeah.
What kind of pace would you go at? I must say my slightly cautious nature would probably go sort of big toe and no further at the start.
Yes, absolutely. You start small and you scale strategically. So it's about piloting first some of your products and your goods. If they're going to be well received properly, so they're going to be well taken across, and you understand some of the players, you understand the value chain. So what that does, it also helps you to get the experience around that particular market. And because the moment you come in, I honestly, it's different to do a due diligence from a laptop unless you actually get into the market, you experience this, you get to understand those markets. So therefore, that is a very important element. But you start small, one step at a time. You'll find that in the next 2 or 3 years, you're able to understand the market, and that's when you can be able to scale fully.
It's so interesting because the opportunity is massive, and you would think, considering where we are as an economy and kind of the developed nature of our economy, that's surely what we would do, is we would be expanding into the rest of Africa more than anyone else.
Yeah, you're spot on, Stephen. And I was talking to, I've shared this before, there's a lady that I interviewed on the podcast, and what she said to me, what is interesting is that it's cheaper for her to export her goods either to Europe or to Asia than to move or to export her goods in Africa. And the heart of that is all about the costs, around the cost of moving some of these goods. And the heart of that is about the border management, that you find that you're going to spend 3 or 4 days around the borders to actually pass over. It's also about just the road infrastructure or the rail infrastructure. And therefore, that's where, again, we have to be heavy and we have to emphasize and put pressure on the politician when it comes to that African continental free trade area to be implemented, to really move and to move this narrative that Africa is so difficult to do business in. Sure. But it should be something that we are also betting on this continent, because we can see what is happening in other continents. And of course, they're starting to really group together and trade amongst each other, some of those countries, for instance, in Asia and in Europe. And therefore, if Africa as well doesn't do that, you find that in the next 5 or 10 years, we still have the same story where we say Africa is a potential, but we never realize that potential. So it all boils down to how African governments really, get into not only the theory side, but into implementation.
Loncedo, thanks so much. Loncedo Mtwente is the Managing Director at Advantage Advisory and host of the Psychobiz Impact podcast.
The Money Show.
Investment School.
Well, time for Investment School. And the question tonight for Investment School is whether or not we're about to enter another commodities super cycle. What am I even talking about? Well, thankfully, Vincent Anthony Raja understands it. He's the CEO and co-founder of Differential Capital. Vincent, good evening. Good to see you again. Happy New Year and all of that.
Yeah, Happy New Year and all of that, Stephen. Thanks for having me.
Okay, so firstly, when we talk about a commodity super cycle, what do we mean?
Okay, what we're talking about here, I guess, is a commodity is generally, when we refer to, is mined goods, and sometimes people also tend to include agricultural produce in there. But I think when you add super cycle or cycle to that, generally you're talking about mined items. So we're talking about precious metals, base metals like copper and those kind of things, and also the bulks as well. Yeah.
Okay, so we're talking about a cycle in which the price of, as we've seen with gold, with copper, with silver, with palladium, with platinum, all of those things are going up at the same time.
Sure.
Why would they go up at the same time if they have such different uses? So platinum, we're always told it's all about the transition from internal combustion engines to electric cars. Gold, we're told, is because central banks are selling their dollars and buying gold with it because of, well, we know why. Silver, it's because something's happening in China and they're not putting extra capacity on the market. Why would all of this be happening when all of these metals are so different?
I think while the metals are generally all different, and we've got to park gold aside because that's a slightly different one. But generally, all the others have heavy industrial use. Most of them. A large component is industrial, sometimes jewelry and other things, but there's a large component is industrial. And if we go back to the last commodity cycle, I remember actually seeing the start of it in a National Geographic magazine where this journalist had done a great piece going to China and documenting the start of these massive factories and starting to comment that, if this continues, there could be something big here. And that's exactly what panned out. So even though we had, let's call it really loose monetary policy, everything that led up to the GFC, but what happened towards the end of the GFC is China's...
Just to be clear, you're talking about the global financial crisis.
Yes, the global financial crisis, that of 2007, 2008. China's economy really took over. And everything in terms of manufacturing, they became dominant in. And as a result, they required more steel to build bridges, etc., put in more electricity, more copper. And as a result, all of the commodity demand increased around the world. And, places from Australia to South Africa, commodity producing countries, were scrambling to supply China. And that kind of drove all of those prices at the same time. And that's what drove that up. Then.
And at the same time, this was in the sort of Mbeki era, typical South African, it's always by the president.
Sure.
And everyone will talk about that era as a time when the economy grew. This was part of that.
Definitely. I think if one looks back at South African history, it's the commodity cycle that drives our economy. As much as you want to, assign it to a president or political or, other things, but the reality is, in South Africa's case, the commodity cycle has a big part to play. There's another important point to consider, Stephen, is that when we think about the commodity cycle, it's also linked to, let's call it the business capex cycle. And here I'm talking about capital expenditure that, big corporations do when they build factories, etc. And what tends to happen is, big businesses also go through cycles where they invest and they underinvest. And when you go through a period where you've been underinvesting in your equipment, etc., for too long, it can very quickly become a case of being having not enough capacity for a growing population or things like that. So what we see around the world right now is economies like India and Vietnam growing very quickly, and large parts of the population, huge volumes of people, moving from, let's call it, lower middle to middle class and consuming a lot more goods and pushing up demand. And what we've seen over the last, I would say, 15 years is the capital expenditure in mines, as an example, has dropped substantially. If one just has to think about South Africa. I mean, not too much mining activity going on, and there's other reasons for that. But that's generally a trend that's been around the world. The amount of capital expenditure in building new mines dropped. Now, the funny thing about a mine is that you can't just dig the hole and pull the commodity out tomorrow. It takes years. So I read somewhere for a copper mine, it can take between 7 to 12 years to finally get it up and running, from the moment you discover the ore to when you pull it out. So what tends to happen is you go through a cycle where you underinvest for a long period of time, and all of a sudden there's sort of maybe demographic reasons for increases in demand, so population growth, or in this case, we're seeing many economies start to transition to higher, economic status. And at the same time, we're seeing this major change in technology, which is the AI boom. All of that converging means that there's a demand for pretty much anything industrial metal related. And then on the other hand, you've now got mines that we haven't invested in globally for the last 15 years. So when you have this shortage, the prices tend to rise extremely. And then that's what we're starting to see.
So, I mean, platinum's a great example where I think Northern Platinum's the only one that's really brought new mines on recently. Yep. Everyone else hasn't. And that's actually created the shortage. And I still find it fascinating that there's suddenly a moment when the market realizes this and suddenly the price shoots up, even though where everything was yesterday in terms of, platinum stocks relative to demand was X on Monday. On Tuesday, it's still X, but the platinum price has gone up because everyone's just realized it.
that's kind of it. It's I've noticed with commodities, it's a slow burn. I worked with a guy called Dr. David Davis probably 7 years ago when I was at one of the large banks, and he wrote a great piece about the coming shortage in the platinum market. And people were talking about it for a long time, that the market was undersupplied and that the mines weren't being built to replace that supply. But in the case of platinum, there's also been this theme that because there's going to be this transition to electric vehicles, the demand was going to fall away. Not realizing that even hybrids, so plug-in hybrids, tend to actually use a lot more platinum than people thought in the past. So all of a sudden you have, again, an exogenous factor like the European Union deciding, well, we're going to kick the can down the road with regards to their transition plans. And now you have a problem because you have a large economy that's decided to defer their transition. And we all know that things like platinum, in particular rhodium, if you look at that, that's now second on the US critical minerals list. So when you've got something that's extremely rare and very difficult to get out the ground. And there's another important factor, Stephen, which is, I would say, unique to this cycle, is that for many commodities, for the past 100 years, a lot of commodities were, you could do what's called open cast mining because the resource was close to the ground. What we're starting to see in many important metals, copper, gold, platinum, etc., the next ore bodies are deep under the ground, which also means the cost of getting them up is also going up. So again, the complexity in providing these commodities to industry has become vastly more difficult than it was, say, for the last 100 years. Copper is a great example where in the 1900s, it was sort of the end of 1900 thereabout, copper was very expensive to get. And then all of a sudden, huge improvements in technology, exploration, etc., the price of copper collapsed. And now, if you look at the last 15 years, I think one of the most recent mine discoveries in the US, as an example, is a place called Resolution Copper. That copper is 2 kilometers underneath the ground, which is not typical for, let's call it, the last 100 years of copper mining.
And half the depth of where your new platinum's going to be in Rustenburg.
Exactly. And then that's that's platinum. And if you think about gold, you've got some of the mines, particularly in South Africa, the deepest mines on earth. So I think that's all of that coming together, and we'll get to gold in a second. But when we talk about the rest of the industrial metals, you have this combination of increased demand and the fact that people haven't been investing in mines for a long time. It's something that gives me great excitement, when I think about the potential for South Africa. Is if this sustained high prices continue, I think we're in for hopefully more investment into a sector that can employ a lot of people, which is something we desperately need.
No, I mean, the potential is huge. Yeah. It's interesting to me that we have several things happening together, which is also what happened the last time, even though they're unrelated. So there's no real relationship between the transition or the decision by the European Union to delay the transition to electric cars, which stimulates demand for platinum, and the AI boom, which stimulates demand for copper. Does this happen quite often where lots of commodities suddenly go up in value at the same time? I can understand the China example that we spoke about in the 2000s, because that makes sense because it's such a big country and it needed so many things. That economy needed so many things at the same time. In this case, though, these things are, they're tenuously related, but they're not directly related at all.
Not directly, but I also think this trend of not wanting to invest in mining, if you look at many large investment banks, they hardly lend to miners anymore. The issues around carbon footprint of mining, etc. So there's been a lot of similar reasons as to why we haven't invested in the supply chain of these commodities for a long time. Sometimes the hope that they would be recycling and things like that, which haven't panned out as people would have thought. So I think when you've got that, and I find it's interesting with humanity, some of these trends are long term and you can see them coming.
Yeah.
I've been reading BHP's annual. They've got a great piece that they write about commodity economics, and they've been talking about these shortages in many of these commodities for a long time. But as you said, Stephen, when you're approaching something that's in deficit and you suddenly have one or two things move, especially in the demand side, because that tends to be what drives it, is when people realize, oh, hang on, we're going to have to build a few more data centers, and 2 years from now there's a big shortage. That's what causes the panic and the squeeze.
And that's what's so interesting, because you talk about reading in the National Geographic article, which suddenly made you realize these super factories or gigafactories in China were going to be a thing. We've known about AI, let's call it, for 3 years. Okay. It's only quite recently that everybody's made the link to copper.
Yeah.
Again, we'll talk about gold after the break, because once we get there, we'll never get off it. But the same with platinum. People suddenly realized it should have been foreseeable, and yet it wasn't foreseen.
100%. Maybe I could just add one more point, Stephen. You've got the ones that we're talking about that are squeezing upwards, but there's one slight difference this time round. Have you noticed how oil prices are going the other way?
Yeah.
So I think in the case of oil, here we also have a long-term trend that's been observable, declining use of demand slightly. Not declining, but slower growth in demand. But, again, I think this is part of the geopolitical games that are happening. If you have a country like Venezuela ramping up production, I mean, I read somewhere the other day that, the South America can ramp up production for, another 10 million barrels a day. So this time round, we have something interesting happening. Is you have, all of the longer term trends that you said, like AI, population growth. But for some reason, capital markets, I'm talking about investors here, haven't been quick to go out there and invest in new mines to supply these things. It's been a wait and see. And maybe that's a fair point. I was actually looking at some economics for some of these commodities. And, again, for platinum, it's almost like you need it to be above 2,000 for mines to start thinking about sinking a new shaft. In the case of copper, you need copper to get to $13,000, $14,000 a ton to start thinking about increasing supply. So it's kind of like you almost needed this panic and this increase. And if you look at previous cycles, this could only be the beginning because, sure, the prices go up now, but it's not like tomorrow we're going to have all of a sudden a whole lot of new platinum out on the streets. Silver is another great example where, yes, it's kind of linked to gold. But, Stephen, if you notice what's happening with the demand for solar panels as an example, that's become a key driver of the demand for silver.
Why?
I wonder. I think in South Africa we've solved all of our load shedding problems, but nonetheless, I think the demand for solar panels and the transition means that a metal like silver, which I think there's a good example of where I think there's only a few, like one or two listed miners out there. So I think you have all of these things coming together where you have this sudden slight jump in demand, and then the panic sets in. And as you said, we watch it for 3-4 years,
and then
when it takes off, these things go like a rocket. And that's what I've noticed with commodity cycles. They also crash quickly too, so that's...
We're going to come to that. Yeah. Vincent Anthony Raj is the CEO and co-founder of Differential Capital Investment School. Tonight, is the commodities market entering a super cycle?
The Money Show.
Investment School.
6 minutes now to 8 the time. Vincent Anthony Raj, CEO and co-founder of Differential Capital. Is the commodities market entering a super cycle? Vincent, let me just throw a curved ball, if I may. So, one of the reasons we're talking about this is because of the unbelievable performance of gold. Now, if it was not for that, would we still be talking about it? And I say that because gold could be having an outsized influence on our perception of what's really happening.
I think gold is indicating and reacting to some of the drivers that are pushing the other commodities. And I'll explain quite simply what's happening around the world, specifically in countries like the US, where they're going to have to stimulate the economy. And, investment markets, when that is potentially reckless, I'm not going to use the word potentially, investors try and hedge themselves from that. And gold traditionally has always been a place people go and hide. So That's an important factor. The other component is, and it's factual, if you look at what central banks around the world are doing, they are diversifying their reserve base for various reasons. It's just common sense. I mean, if a particular currency becomes a risk to you, it just makes sense to diversify. And of course, gold has now overtaken the US dollar as the most popular reserve for reserve banks. Now, all of that is driving the price of gold up. But what is starting to drive the other commodities up is these large economies like the US and I believe potentially China are going to start to stimulate the economies and potentially print more money, inject a lot of liquidity, and that's what's driving the other commodities. So it's almost like gold was the let's call it the first signal that, not only are we seeing sort of natural demand drivers like, population growth, AI, etc., but we're also going to see, let's call it political stimulation.
Sure.
And all of this together is what's setting gold on fire. And to be honest, that's also going to drive the other economies, the other commodities probably a bit more aggressively than would normally have happened.
So are there risks to this? Are there things that could stop this commodity super cycle or parts of it in its tracks? I mean, could there be an AI share collapse on the NASDAQ and that's it for copper?
Yeah, so I think from the supply side, I don't see too many risks of all of a sudden finding huge amounts of, copper and platinum and things like that. Oil is another story. I think oil is one we need to watch where there's substitution, etc. So I think oil is one to watch where there could be a supply reason that drags down the price of that commodity. Here's my where it gets perhaps concerning is where you've had economies fueled by loose monetary policy. We know that doesn't last for long. We've seen it. We saw it briefly during COVID, where there was a lot of what were they called stimmy checks, pumped into households. They spent a lot of money, drove up the prices of commodities, but within 12 months everything dropped and collapsed again. So that is something to be wary of. Is where there's been an artificial stimulus that can't last forever. There's got to be sustained economic growth thereafter. And generally, when politicians drive stimulus into economy, called the follow through is kind of weak, So I think that's something to be concerned of. Then, if you also look at the other incremental driver of demand, AI seems very impressive, but at the moment it's kind of at the early internet phase where it's being used for all sorts of silly things, and hopefully, let's call it really productive uses of AI come through that justify this large amount of money that's being spent on it. And I think that needs to happen reasonably soon, in order to justify the demand. I mean, the amount of money that's being spent on power and data centers and things like that is substantial, particularly in the US. That's one area that I think one should be concerned of. And then the other component that I would say that's been artificially driving up the demand is this isolationist approach by the US and perhaps other economies means that there's maybe an artificial scramble for commodities that might just go away if people decide to work better together.
Vincent, thank you. Vincent Anthony Raj is CEO and co-founder of Differential Capital.